Stay meditated, breathe, stay fit, exercise, eat well, take care of yourself and your family so that we are ready to do what we do. This is what we do. Push back, change, fight back, challenge, inform, resist. That's what we do. We've been doing it for generations. We sure ain't gonna stop now. Orange Man, we're coming for you. 4:59 in the morning. It's Radio Free 102.3 KJLH, Compton, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Inglewood. Dr. Umar Johnson is in town, and we're going to be talking with him next. And we are taking your phone calls. Wake up, Front Page family. It's a new year. 520-KJLH, 520-5554. Total Talk Expression, Radio Free 102.3 KJLH.
Get my next check.
Radio Free 102.3 KJLH, KJLHradio.com, 5:05 in the morning. As promised, clinical psychologist. He's an expert on the mental health of African American children. And he's speaking here in LA on this Saturday on Black politics during the Donald Trump presidency. Boy, that's a 10-hour speech in the making. He's one of our most recognized social scientists and Pan-Africanists. He is an author. Appears on lots and lots of media. One of his books, The Psychoacademic Holocaust, The Special Education and ADHD War Against Black Boys. Also famous for his work on building a school for African American boys. Dr. Umar Johnson is joining us. Good morning, Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, can you hear me? Good morning, Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Johnson is also a descendant of Frederick Douglass and the late Bishop Alexander Wayman. Dr. Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Welcome to the Front Page.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Seems amazing that you've never been on our show before. Well, maybe with Carl Nelson, but not since I've been here. So it's great to have you on. And you'll be in L.A. on Saturday, right?
Yes, ma'am. Looking forward to it. My first visit since 2014, so it's been a few years.
And where is that lecture taking place?
That will be at the Ward AME Church at 1177 West 25th Street in South Central.
So, it's funny. We were talking in the studio, and I think a lot of people find your voice to be a voice with a perspective on African American men that maybe we don't hear in the media, or we don't hear even in popular culture. Is that part of what you seek to do, is redefine or redelineate the way African American men are perceived or discussed?
I think that's accurate. I think that's accurate. I guess the primary objective of mine is to tell the truth, the real truth, as it relates to what is really going on in the United States, as it relates to black boys and as it relates to black men. And it's very important that people understand that you cannot destroy the life of a black man unless you have first disadvantaged the life of a black boy. See, prison doesn't even become a conversation until you deal with special education, which is the school to prison pipeline. Until you deal with the ADHD and the psychiatric medication and the juvenile incarceration and the fact that black boys lead the nation in suspensions and expulsions, which is ironic because we hear a lot about high school dropout. We hear a lot about black boys not wanting to go to school. But we don't hear a lot about how schools create the negative disposition that black boys have towards getting an education by constantly sending them home when they do show up to learn.
Well, the fact that our Attorney General, or former Attorney General, Eric Holder, had to issue guidelines to schools in order to stop them from suspending or try to slow down the rate of suspension and expulsion, particularly of African American boys, but also girls, is really telling in that area, I think.
Well, ironically, with education, because it is not a constitutional right, it largely falls to the states to implement the rights of children. The feds come in because they have to guarantee equal protection under the law, the 14th Amendment. So they're largely looking to make sure that states and school districts are protecting the rights of black children to learn, since they have made it a right. And when you look at special ed, when you look at No Child Left Behind, Reach to Achieve, all of the federal programs are largely enforced through funding. So because there's no constitutional right to learn, the feds come in and say, hey, we know we can't make you do certain things, but what we will do is fund the things we want you to do. And so basically the loss of money becomes the motivating force that keeps school districts and states in line as it relates to providing children with that, quote unquote, equal education. However, there's a lot of areas that the feds are not funding. So when you look at school discipline, there is no federal program to reduce suspicion and expulsion of black boys. And ironically, we've seen an explosion in the suspension and expulsion rates of black boys in the post-Columbine era, which is quite interesting because Columbine was a white tragedy. But although it was a white tragedy, it gave birth to what's called zero tolerance laws, which basically says if a child makes a threat, if a child enacts seriously, by now, the drug piece, we can understand.
Tolerance is really ridiculous.
I agree.
Even when it comes to drug. And when we get to this whole pious, chest beating, pearl clutching, pontificating state, that's how we got 3 strikes in California. That's how we get bamboozled into, I think, into imprisoning our own community because people do it in the name of safety or some kind of moral high ground.
Exactly. And it's the threat. What your listeners need to know, it is the threats that black boys make inadvertently out of anger because of how they're being treated that is leading to so many of them being expelled. And keep in mind that kindergarten and first grade boys are being suspended and expelled at a rate that is greater than white boys in high school. What can a 5 or 6-year-old do that can get them put out of school for the rest of their life?
As a mother, if you can't control a 5-year-old and you have to expel them, then you don't need to be teaching or you do not need to be a principal. I'm sorry.
Absolutely correct. And it's important that black parents tell their children, do not make threats, because most of the kids who I evaluate, I do the psychological evaluations as a school psychologist. My job is to see if they qualify for special education. And most of the kids who are being expelled for making threats, they never been in a fight. They never would hurt a fly. They did it out of anger. In other words, I'm angry, so I'm going to say, I'm going to blow up this school. He's only 6. He don't have any bombs. He don't have access to dynamite. And you know this. But because he said, I'm going to blow up this school at 6, that's leading to record numbers of expulsions of black boys.
Yeah. And honestly, it can be a perceived threat, right? And when you get into perceived threat, then that's where our racial perceptions or prejudices come into play. I mean, I know of a child who was actually expelled for making his fingers into a gun.
Yes, or saying I'm going to join Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. A lot of kids this past year, the 2015-2016 school year across the country, that is the fastest growing reason for why black boys are being expelled, for simply making a joke, not even angry, just joking. I'm going to join the Taliban. Expulsion. I mean, he doesn't even understand what the Taliban is. He just knows it's something negative.
Right.
It's always on the news, and that gets him kicked out of school forever.
Yeah, and so what do we do? I mean, two things that, I know you're talking about, black politics in Trump's America, but clearly this is part of it, because he's one of the first moves they're going to do while they're privatizing everything is privatizing schools. And I know that a lot of people feel charter schools or independent schools are the answer, but if we see a widespread voucher movement, which is what Trump has indicated he will go for, and when charter schools become privatized, then what happens is they cherry pick many of the students that are already doing well out of the public schools and leave those special ed kids and so-called troubled kids, behind, with no resources, no variety of in their student body, and basically, abandoning the public school system abandons a lot of kids.
Oh, without question. And what the African American community needs to know about the charter school movement is it was never designed for us. And because it was designed for us in 2015, we saw more black charter schools shut down across the country than in any year since charter schools were started. Charter schools began in 1990. It was a movement that came from white folks, mid-America, who wanted to educate white kids on a public dollar. But because you cannot use public funds to fund private education, charter school was created as a compromise. It is a public school that is operated by private citizens. It is still public. Charter schools must obey and follow the exact same laws that public schools follow. They're given the freedom to innovate the academic process. They're given the freedom to determine how the operation of the school will be, but they still must obey the laws. They must still do special ed. They must still do standardized testing. But what the black community really needs to get is that charter schools are being used by white conservatives and even white liberals as well, white folk, period, to gentrify the black community. One of the best ways to clean out a black community, to take it back for the white folk, is to open up a charter school. This is happening all across the country because the black community is not going to look suspicious at a school. So what do you want to do? If I want to take back a certain part of Compton, a certain part of Watts, a certain part of South Central, I'll send in a black person to front the charter school operation because I know the black community is doing research on who's really pushing the school. And what's going to happen is when that school opens, I'm going to hire 95% of white people or Mexicans or whomever. They're going to come in. They're going to buy up all the property in the area that's surrounding the school. And black parents, again, are not going to be, suspicious of this because it's good to have your teachers living up the street and around the corner. But what's going to happen is they're going to raise the property value, and you're going to see the neighborhood slowly transform from one that was predominantly black to one that is predominantly white in 5 to 10 years. And so the black parent who thought the charter school was for their kid can no longer even afford to live in a charter school, live in a neighborhood where a charter school operates.
Well, I don't know if that exact paradigm is happening on the West Coast, but I can see what you're saying as far as the different dynamics that come into play. And I feel like the privatization of schools is being sort of pushed in the door partly through the charter school movement. Yes, they have to follow a lot of the rules, but they don't have to have unionized teachers. They a lot of times they skirt the rules when it comes to special ed. And when you say, a Mexican or whatever, here in LA, most of the time, African American and Latino neighborhoods are the ones that are low income neighborhoods. So it's not the Latino coming in that's creating the gentrification. The neighborhood already doesn't upgrade automatically. But we do see a huge gentrification movement here, though, in LA. I think we're really on the brink of like San Francisco, where there's none of us left, just being priced out.
Yes, and charterization is a very, very, very big part of that. And speaking of the Mexican issue, that is an issue in LA. Because I get tons of calls. I have a Tuesday morning call that I do for black parents where they can call in, and I'll be sure to give that info before we get off the line. They can call in and get any answer they need for any issues related to education and mental health for their children. And one of the biggest issues that I'm hearing from black parents in LA is the Latino issue, without question. They're saying that in the charter schools and even in the public schools, a lot of the issues that matter to black children are being overlooked for issues that matter to the Latino and Mexican issues. So just hearing...
Well, yeah, I mean, we have been pitted against each other quite effectively. That's true. But we also have a lot of great coalition building and like with the community coalition in South LA, African American Latino parents teamed up to get those advanced placement classes into our high schools. There were none in South LA. Now they are. But yeah, we are effectively pitted against each other. But my question had to do with you're talking about politics in the Trump era, right? Black power politics in the age of Donald Trump. How does that what are your recommendations in terms of education? Because, I mean, they're coming straight out the box to privatize, and that is not meant to serve us. I mean, they're talking about a voucher. You get a voucher. The voucher's not going to be enough to pay for that private school.
Well, that's the whole...
But it depletes the public school and leaves you,
Exactly. Well, that's the catch-22. That's the whole purpose. Well, first of all, Donald Trump's Secretary of Education is Betsy DeVos. She basically is the person who destroyed Detroit public schools. And I just came from Detroit during a lecture there this past Friday. She destroyed Detroit public schools with the charter school movement. She was the charter school queen in Michigan. She was one of the ones who helped defund and create the catastrophe that we see in Detroit public schools today. Well, they're going to replicate that across the country. So she's not only going to charterize, she's also coming in with the voucher. And I think you just hit the nail on the head with what you said, which is an analogy I've been trying to get to black parents across the country, that if you're not a middle-class black parent with a strong income, the voucher system does nothing for you, because if you're a single black mother, okay, on the west side of L.A., and you have 4 kids and you're raising them on your own, and L.A. public schools gives you a $5,000 voucher, but the school you want to send your kids to costs $12,000 a year, you now have to come up with an extra $7,000 times 4 children. That's $28,000 on top of the voucher that you have to come up with. So the voucher does nothing for poor or working class, and even for a lot of middle class parents, especially single. Mind you, 75% of black children are raised by single parent mothers. Where are they going to come up with that other money? Now, 1 kid, maybe. 2 kids, possibly. But if you're dealing with 3 or more children, the voucher does nothing for you. And that's the whole...
in L.A., if you have 1 kid, the voucher does nothing for you, because our private schools are $30,000 and $40,000 a year.
Wow.
Unless you go in a Catholic school. In a Catholic school, you can maybe get like 20, 15, 20 grand. Yeah.
Well, see, also...
So we're all going to Catholic school now? I'm sorry. Exactly. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the issue becomes, why do they want to shut down public school in the first place? And people need to understand something. Although public school in America was birthed by the church movement, it was modernized by capitalism. Okay, in the early part of the 20th century, it was the corporations that came to the government and said, listen, we need a better educated low-wage earner. Because the technological revolution brought with it a need for
that is true.
Employees. They said, listen, you have to give us something better. We need better educated slaves, basically. And so that's when the government stepped in and say, hey, we got to improve education, because it's going to affect our bottom line income if we don't have educated workers. Well, for the African Americans, there's no longer jobs for us. They're not interested in hiring us. And then with Bill Clinton's NAFTA and President Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership and Donald Trump's new economic movement that's going to send even more jobs out of the United States, there's very little jobs for anybody, regardless of color. And, of course, when America catches a cold, black America catches the flu. So if you don't have jobs for black people, what is the purpose of education? If it's to prepare you to work and there is no work, you don't need the schools anymore. And that's why you're seeing this massive national public school shutdown movement. So what is the purpose of education now for the black child? It's to prepare the girls for poverty and the boys for prison.
Well, and then there's also the profit motive. I mean, I feel like the privatization of education is also a profit, story. But clearly, even without the color line, which is still present, I mean, you look at the automation, you look at AI is doing everything, right? And artificial intelligence, that we can, we can get to a point within our lifetime where really hardly anybody has a job.
True.
Then what?
Well, yeah, but looking specifically at our condition,
right?
Half the black men in America have been unemployed consistently since 1985.
So what do we do about it? I mean, you are proposing a school. What are you going to do different in your school? If there's no jobs there, I mean, obviously we create jobs when we create businesses, but what would you do differently?
Well, number one, we have to get away from this whole thing of sending out the kids to college to get a job because there are no jobs. There's 2 million African Americans right now with master's and doctorate degrees who cannot find work. I get resumes all the time. I get resumes from black lawyers who can't even find work. So this whole religion that black America has had, believing that sending our kids to college is automatically a road to success, we're finding that that's not the case in many respects.
Well, it depends what you define as success, right? I mean, if getting a job and, paying your bills is your definition of success, and okay. But I mean, having an educated mind, is a means, is an end unto itself.
I mean, that's the point. That's not even happening. You get your degree, and in most African Americans, at least 40% of us don't even work in areas that are related to the field in which we earned our credentials.
Right, but you're bringing it back to work. I'm saying, education as in being a person who knows their history, who has a sense of critical thinking, who can, create something for themselves or for their family, whether they have a job or not. I understand what you're saying. I actually agree with you that this cult of go to college so that you can go into the corporate pipeline is not necessarily serving us. But does that mean don't go to college, don't get educated? That I wouldn't agree with.
Yeah, well, I would agree that we need to stop sending black children en masse to college. That is not benefiting us. All it's doing is putting record numbers of black people and their families into lifelong debt. So some of us go to college, of course we should. But the mistake we made beginning in the 1980s with the deindustrialization of the inner city high schools, which was done on purpose to pave the way for the mass incarceration culture, what they did was they took out the building trades from many of the inner city high schools. You'd be hard-pressed to find a high school in America today, and there's a few, but they're far and few in between, where you can actually learn how to be an electrician.
Well, you know what? That I agree with. And I think LA is actually a few steps ahead on that, because there's a movement here with black and brown actually working together to try to get those trades back into the high schools, because it's true, college is not for everybody. But I think if we say our definition of success is to climb the corporate ladder, then yeah, college is not the answer. But if it's about education, which is, expanding our knowledge, whether it's knowledge of self or just knowledge of the world, you can't go wrong with that.
Yes, you can at $150,000 for the education.
So don't go to $150,000 college. I went to San Francisco State.
You also went to school a generation ago, and those prices, I can promise you.
Yeah, but it ain't no $150,000 at a state university.
Well, maybe not at San Francisco State, but I went to a state university in Pennsylvania, which is now $20,000 a year, and while I was there, it was only $7,000. The bottom line,
right? Well, go to City College then. Go somewhere. Read a book. Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying, I understand what you're saying in terms of becoming part of this corporate cog and not even getting the jobs that are available, or not even having a trade or a skill that you can feed yourself with. But on the other hand, there's this sort of knee-jerk anti-intellectualism, or sort of,
Well, it's not anti-intellectualism, because our greatest minds never went to college. But the thing is,
okay,
parents need to have
some did and some didn't.
With their children. They need to have a serious conversation with their children about whether or not this is what they need to do, and if they are committed to it. Because above and beyond that, even with the black children who go to college, the retention rates are extremely low, especially for black males. They'll go for a year or two, and many of the brothers are not finishing, the sisters as well. But see, a lot of them can't even afford it anyhow, because even and above, the federal grants and the state loans and that type of thing, the Pell Grants, it's still not feasible for a lot of them to be able to afford it. So you invest this type of money, $100,000 education, with no guarantee of a return on your investment. But to answer your question, what we're going to do differently at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, it's going to have an economic basis. So we're going to drive, the entrepreneurial model. Our children will be able to create their own business plans. They will be taught that. They will be taught investing. They will be taught real estate. They will be taught traditional means to wealth acquisition that may require post-secondary ed, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. Mind you, so many of us are getting degrees in subjects that are not even economically relevant.
And
I mean, if you're a political,
the problem with that is what? I mean, Black Studies is not economically relevant, but it's really relevant for your mind, body, soul, and
but it doesn't need to
your
go
liberation. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. But I feel you. So are you saying, Dr. Umar Johnson, are you saying that capitalism is the answer to capitalism? Is that what you're saying? Well, I'm hearing what you're saying. So you're going to teach business and you're going to teach the skills of thriving in corporate America to combat corporate America?
No, will only be saved through a solid economic foundation. Black families, okay, are an endangered species, and part of the reason
I will never co-sign that. I will never ever co-sign that.
In fact, you don't have to, but the
I won't.
clearly show that.
Okay, well, let's not make a self-fulfilling prophecy.
No, but I'm stating the reality. You don't solve problems unless you address them as they are. And the black.
Well, my black family is not an endangered species.
Well, the ones I see are as a therapist, and so what we have to do is, if we want to help save that, we have to help men and women be able to do a better job of taking care of that family, and that comes with economic opportunity. And so when you look at the fact that we spent $600 million on McDonald's last year, or $9 billion on Weave and Perm, or $6 billion on Air Jordans, or $4 billion on alcohol and malt liquor, the truth of the matter is the black community has
$600 million on McDonald's. Woo.
Yes, we did.
That was a new fact for me today. I think I'm going to throw up.
We can create our own economic vehicles. We're the richest African population on the planet, the 11th richest nation on the planet, $1 trillion economy. We spend more in a year than 25% of all the countries in Africa have to spend for the entire year. And so if we organized economically, there's nothing that we could not do. And it starts with building community-based credit unions and community-based banks. It only costs $250,000 to start a credit union, and it only costs $1 million to start a small bank. If we can do that, we can then begin to build the institutions that the black community needs, as opposed to being dependent on outsiders for support.
Well, I when I'm saying this, I am not saying that we should not do what you suggest. I mean, I do feel like economic education, basic business. I mean, how to not get ripped off, how to manage what you do have, all of those, the boycott movement, the blackout movement. I mean, I think all of those things are really, really important. But I am wary of defining our success and our understanding of what being an educated mind means, or a conscious mind means, solely in terms of money and capitalism. I think, historical context, how to be a human being, arts and culture, literature, and all of those things are super important to being a well-rounded human being.
I agree, but you can't eat that.
I can. My family been eating that for generations.
There is no people in human history, including my family or yours, that has been able to sustain itself without a serious economic program. When you look at every problem Black America has, it is related, if not directly, an outgrowth of the fact that we do not have an independent economic power base for ourselves. And when you compare that to other ethnic minorities in America, they have just that. That's why you have a Chinatown in almost every city. That's why you have...
Yeah, well, of course, most of them are connected, more connected to a country of origin, like China, right?
Well, the cultural identity is the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And that's part of our problem, because we do not have that collective consciousness. We don't have that shared identity. The self-hate issues, the post-traumatic slavery disease has really eroded Black people's willingness to gather around our shared historical and cultural experience.
Well, Dr. Umar Johnson, you're talking to the daughter of poets, so, we eat words. That's how we live. But I understand your point, and certainly we have to have some infrastructure if we're going to move forward and elevate.
Exactly.
We're talking with Dr. Umar Johnson. We're taking your phone calls, 520-KJLH, 520-5554. He's in town. You can go hear him speak Saturday at Ward AME Church, 1177 West 25th in L.A. What time is that, by the way?
The doors open up at 3. The program will be from 5 until 8. We have open and acts. We also will have a lot of vendors. And with regard to my message, it will be split up into 3 pieces. The first will be education. I absolutely have to expose special ed and expose...
Yeah, I want to talk more about that. I have some questions about that.
We have to talk about that special ed. So education is the first third, politics is the second third, and then economics is the third piece of the cake. And I will also have copies of my book, Psychoacademic Holocaust, for Special Education and ADHD Wars Against Black Boys, which is the only book ever written in American history by a black school psychologist that teaches parents how to fight back against the system legally and effectively. So it is a must-read for all LA parents.
5:34 in the morning. We're taking your phone calls for Dr. Umar Johnson, 520-KJLH, 520-5554. If I didn't ask it, why don't you do it? It's the front page, Total Talk Expression, Radio Free, 102.3 KJLH. It's going to be chilly today. Highs in the low 60s and rainy right now, 55 degrees in the city of Compton. I'm Dominic DePrima for Radio Free 102.3 KJLH and KJLHradio.com. Continuing our conversation with Umar Johnson, Dr. Umar Johnson. We got a bunch of phone calls, going to run through those. Before we get to that, I want to remind you tonight. No, not tonight. Saturday. Okay, I'm back. It's not vacation anymore. I'm here. Saturday, at 10:30 to noon. Join me at Simply Wholesome Restaurant, top of the hill. It's Slauson and Overhill, the big green pointy tower, the health food restaurant. We're going to be there at 10:30 in the morning talking about our trip to Africa. We're going to Senegal and Ethiopia. We are going in June. It's my second trip back to the motherland, and you can come with me, get all the information, meet the folks that are behind the trip, and get your questions answered. That is free, and it's going to be at Simply Wholesome Restaurant. We will see you there. Continuing our conversation with Dr. Umar Johnson, clinical psychologist and author. And Dr. Johnson, we got a whole bunch of calls for you, so I want to turn to the phones, if that's all right with you. Dr. Johnson, phone's okay with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Got a bunch of callers. Let's go to El Nubian from Los Angeles.
Hello.
Hi, you're on with Dr. Umar Johnson. Welcome.
All right, welcome back.
Thank you.
Brother. It's so crazy how this system kind of... and much props to that brother, the millionaire that's doing that for those young women in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that story.
How the system really attacks our children. I remember last June when everything was burning up around here. They showed the area where it was the next day after they had fought some fires in the Hollywood Hills. They showed the staging area. All these firemen in their regular uniforms, not their firefighting uniforms, but just their blue uniforms, saw no black faces. And then by August, September, they announced that at Garfield and Wilmington High School, they were putting 2 firefighter academies at those 2 schools. And I know this firefighter makes good money. And
okay, so I need the short version, El Nubian, because there's folks that want to talk to Dr. Johnson, and I got a couple questions. We only have him till 6, so we pass the mic to Steve Harvey, as always.
The thing is, those schools have no black, maybe Wilmington, but have no black attendees. And it's a shame. Why couldn't they put it at Crenshaw? I mean, Crenshaw isn't even a black school anymore.
I feel you. So, do you have a question for Dr. Johnson, or you're just kind of giving him an amen over here?
That example. How,
Okay, so I hear you, and I'm going to take what you just said, El Nubian. I appreciate the call, and translate it into a question, which is, what do we do to accomplish what you're talking about, which is getting more opportunities for these types of jobs, firefighters, to bring back these trades? What should we do, and what can you specifically do for Los Angeles?
Well, as it relates to making sure we get our share of those types of specialty jobs that are clearly handled by the city, the state, and the county, is we're going to have to put pressure on elected officials. We're going to have to make it a campaign mandate. And then I also think that there has to be a serious type of, not necessarily a boycott, but there must be a political referendum, a political move that makes it that where the black community community makes its voice loud and clear that they want their share of those types of jobs, because there's a national movement to control the amount of blacks who are actually hired by the fire department and many of the other type of civil service jobs.
And what are you, I mean, you're here speaking, obviously you want to bring your knowledge, but are you planning to open a school here? I mean, what specifically can you do for Southern California?
Well, one of the big things I'm going to be talking about is the National Independent Black Parents Association, which is an organization we started to organize black parents across the country to fight for educational change in the 7 key areas of special education, discipline, policy, finance, social support, homeschooling, and parent advocacy. And we'll be having our 3rd training conference for those who want to start chapters in San Diego on the 27th and 28th of January. So the first Saturday will be Los Angeles, but the last weekend will be San Diego for the parent training conference.
Now, you currently have a school, right? You have a school?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so I know you've been trying to build one. What's the status of that?
Well, the status of that is that we've raised approximately $700,000, and we're still raising more funds. And folks can donate at GoFundMe.com/Dr. Umar. 2017 is the year to acquire the building. And so I'll be in Atlanta looking at some schools next week. I was invited by Reverend Bernice King.
So this is gonna open in Atlanta. Why?
No, not necessarily. No.
Oh, okay. You said you're looking at buildings there. Well, so why so much? I mean, 700,000 seems like it should be enough to open a school. No?
Not at all. I mean, the school buildings are generally no less than $1 million. There are a couple that are just under $1 million, and that's why I'm going to be looking at some in Atlanta. Then I'll be going back to Detroit to look at some. It's a national search, so I've been looking at schools across the country for a while.
I see.
So 2017 is the year to acquire the building, but the first day of school has been set for the anniversary of the Nat Turner Award on August the 21st of 2018, day one.
All right, we're going to go to Charlotte from Los Angeles. Good morning, Charlotte. You're on with Dr. Umar Johnson. Welcome.
Good morning and Happy New Year. My statement is that I saw a sign that said black babies are endangered species. That was on 88th and Avalon. Since then, that sign has been taken out. I really didn't appreciate that statement at all, period. And I saw it at Imperial and Central Avenue. I don't see it there anymore. I really didn't like that statement because my kids are not endangered species. I don't care what he say and what he put in his mind to think. My kids are not, and nobody kids black are. And that's a terrible sign to put up.
Well, I mean, you know, Charlotte, that I agree with that. I think we have to focus on what we want, not what we don't want. And I think that doesn't mean that I'm Pollyanna and I don't understand the existing conditions or the history of our people or post-traumatic slave syndrome or any of that. It just means that we have so much negativity put out there about us and by us, by the mainstream media, by the popular culture, etc. I'm not giving it an amen. I focus on what I want, and I'm going to uplift the things that are uplifting us, and that's my philosophy. But obviously, Dr. Umar, you don't agree.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that Dr. Umar focuses on the truth as it is, with a very optimistic belief that Black America can fix its problems. But coming from a psychologist's perspective, no problem gets solved unless it's accurately accepted, dealt with, and conceptualized. So that's
but you know, we spend so much time talking about the problem, and so little time talking about the solution. And I feel like
never get to the solution unless you properly understand the problem.
I think we understand the problem. I really do. Well, maybe some folks don't. I think Front Page Family understands the problem.
We do not understand how problems operate. For example, miseducation. People know the schools are a problem, but they don't really understand how special ed operates to disadvantage.
Okay, let's talk about special ed, because I don't want to let you leave without dealing with that, because I think this is a real issue that is not covered much.
Well, special ed was started in 1975 by an act of Congress to give children with disabilities a right to a free and appropriate public education. That was 21 years after Brown versus Board of Education. One of its subversive functions was to allow white schools to continue to resegregate black kids away from white kids. Instead of saying you're doing it because they're black, you can now say you're doing it because they have a learning disability, or because they're mildly mentally retarded, or because they have ADHD. So special ed has been used to resegregate black America from white America in the classroom.
So again, what's the solution? What do we do about this? I mean, I think that sometimes
their rights.
Yeah.
To know that they have a right to say no to the psychological evaluation. They have a right to say no to ADHD. They need to also understand that most of these diagnoses that we give cannot be objectively proven to exist. They're not scientific.
That's interesting.
They are professional opinions. So it's knowing the law, and that's what I'm going to cover in detail on Saturday.
Dr. Johnson, when you say you have a right to say no to the evaluation, you're saying don't even let them evaluate the child at all? Because even if they evaluated the child, you could still contest the placement, right?
You could. You very well could, but most parents are not going to contest the placement because the purpose of the eval in the first place was to change the placement.
Right. Okay. And so, here's another question. I'm a mom, so I'm going to ask you a million questions about this. So, what about the ADHD? Because I feel like, and this is, some people might get mad at me, but I feel like some parents readily accept that because it means it's not my fault that my kid, or my responsibility that my kid is acting out. And so I'd rather just say ADHD and give them a pill or something.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. First of all, ADHD is a fraud. It is a hoax. It was invented by the publicly traded Wall Street drug companies who heavily fund the American Psychiatric and Psychological Association to a tune of millions of dollars. They invented this disorder, which is nothing more than regular boy behavior, and they're making $30 billion a year off of doping up black.
You're saying no one has it? That it doesn't exist?
Exactly. It doesn't exist. As defined, it is a joke. When you look at the criteria for ADHD, cannot sit still, loses things necessary to get his work done.
Right. That's me, actually.
Quietly. It's a regular child, and that's why you have so many.
And a lot of regular grown folks. Okay, so, but I mean, I said that and I felt bad because I know parents, I have friends, their parents whose children have been diagnosed this way, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but maybe they're getting misinformation. So what are we supposed to do about that? I mean, it's...
Number one, parents need to know that teachers are not psychologists. That's number one. A teacher has no legal authority to tell a parent, your child has ADHD, go get him some medicine. But that's exactly what's happening across America, and it's being pushed by the drug companies because they finance a lot of the teacher training conferences. You go to any teacher conference in America, you see Ritalin is there, Adderall is there, Serta is there, Metadate is there. I mean, they're literally marketing this stuff to teachers, many of whom aren't really interested in giving black boys the type of attention they need anyway.
Is it
being able to sedate them with a pill is a dream come true for
Is it overly simplistic to say that if we got our kids like eating healthier, got them off sugar, got them exercising, and gave them some real attention, that we might see better results in terms of the behaviors that we're talking about here?
The last thing you said was the most important of that entire list, and that is give them the attention. When you look at attention deficit...
Get off your phone. Get off your phone and pay attention to your kid.
The attention deficit is not the child. It's a deficit in the attention that they get from the adults in their life.
Yeah.
In this new social networking generation, parents don't make time for their children anymore.
Well, you know what? I noticed that. I mean, I'm always yelling at my kid, you play too much on the video games. I'm looking down at my phone every 5 seconds. And I'm like, dude, you're modeling what you're telling him not to do. Put the phone down, look at your kid, pay attention to him, and then tell him to stop playing video games.
Children have consistently gotten less and less time from their parents over the past 40 years. And the more technologically sophisticated society becomes, the less hands-on time children get. That's a statistical.
So you think it's time? You think it's time and attention from us more than the diet or exercise or any of that?
Diet is critical, and it does play a role. But the biggest reason why we got so many black boys diagnosed with ADHD is because the schools are dominated by women. 93% of all teachers are women, and 97% of all those teachers are white women. So you're dealing with a disconnect between a white female teacher, in many cases, and a black boy. And that has not dealt with. The role of racism And miseducation,
Yeah.
ADHD, has not been adequately dealt with. So the black boy is twice discriminated against. First, he's black, and then he's a male. When boys come to school with that testosterone, with that masculine energy, female teachers don't really know how to deal with that because they are not men. So one of the things that has to happen is we have to bring
know how to deal
more
with it.
black men into the classrooms, not as assistants, not as gym coaches, but as the classroom teacher. But that has not happened because the teachers' unions are extremely powerful and extremely influential.
I don't know if
They are committed to keeping the school a female-dominated institution.
Well, that sounds like a whole other show for another day. I don't think women are the problem, but I can see what you're saying about the disconnect in the schools.
A big piece of the problem. If you don't deal with white female racism, you'll never fix the schools.
Well, we certainly lost an election on it. What about, do you think that a lot of these children that are being diagnosed with ADHD, especially black children, boys and girls, could actually be highly gifted and they're just not getting the educational stimulus that they should be getting? That's my own theory. I'm not a shrink, but
Another marvelous revelation on your part. Most of the black boys that I have seen who were diagnosed with ADHD, when I give the evaluation, intelligence test, guess what? They're scoring in the 90th, 95th percentile. They're high average, above average, and superior. The problem is schools do not focus on the strengths of black children. They do not focus on the strengths of black boys. They worry about their behavior as opposed to the aptitude. Many of those boys are acting the way that they're acting because they're being under-challenged in the class.
yeah, I think so. Shout out to Miss Renee, here in LA, because she was the one that told me, you know what, you always have to get your kid tested to find out if they're gifted. You label them before the system labels them. And then you can demand something from the system, which is a proper education for your child.
Well, gifted is no longer a part of special ed law, so now that means it's not federal anymore. So every state has to decide whether or not they still want to operate gifted. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, where I live, there's still a mentally gifted law, Chapter 16. Michigan no longer has a gifted law. I think
California does, yeah. Yeah, it does. 5:58 in the morning. Time flies when you're talking on the front page. I'm going to squeeze in Dr. Rosie Milligan, and I'm going to ask for the short version, Dr. Milligan. Rosie Milligan?
Yeah, I just want to say years ago, a college degree in any subject was good. We need to look for purpose-driven education. Ask the question, what can I do with what I paid for? I believe a student needs psychology, sociology, so they can understand the mindset of the white man. They need English and composition, know how to write, math, and after that, they need a trade. And not 40%, Dr. Umar, only 25% of people are working in the field that they got a degree in.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rosie Milligan. Dr. Umar Johnson, your quick response to that, and then what will you leave us with this morning?
Totally agree with her comment. I will leave you guys by saying I'm looking forward to coming to Los Angeles. I actually be flying out in just a couple of hours from Philadelphia, and I hope everyone comes on out to the Ward AME Church, 1177 West 25th Street. Again, Saturday the 7th. Doors open up at 3. Program from 5 until 8. I'm going to deal with education, economics, and political organization. So it'll be something for everyone. Folks need more information on that. They can contact me, drumarjohnson.com, DRUMAR Johnson.com, or they can also text me if they need the flyer or the link, 215-989-9858. Again, 215-989-9858. 12 and younger are free. 65 and over are also free. Looking forward to folks coming on out. And tickets are going fast.
All right. Dr. Umar Johnson, it's a pleasure talking with you. Hope you'll come by the front page again soon.
Thank you. And you enjoy the rest of your day.
I will. As you go on your way about your day, let's take a moment to affirm ourselves. Let's take a deep breath in and let us release. Today, let me remember, in the words of my First Lady, Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. Till next time, Radio Free Family, one love.